Hello and welcome. Today I'm going to be doing a full review and demo of the new Charlotte Tilbury foundation. It's called the Beautiful Skin Foundation and I've worn it for one full day and then today is my second time wearing it. So it's more than a first impressions. I've had a little bit of time to test it out and see how it wears. And so today I'm just going to be showing you myself applying it. I'm going to use both a brush and a sponge so we can see what the difference is there. And I'll just talk about my experience with it, my thoughts on the formulation and the foundation overall. So let's get right into it. So this foundation, I feel like it's been a long time coming. Charlotte Tilbury, the brand, has been kind of teasing this foundation for quite some time and it finally came out, I think, last week. It was a bit of a staggered release. I think it came out in some retailers before it actually came out on the Charlotte Tilbury website, but I ordered it from the Charlotte Tilbury website and it arrived yesterday morning to my house. So I've worn it for one full day, as I mentioned, and today is my second time wearing it. I'm going to show you myself applying it right now. So I did one half of my face with a sponge. I used my Real Techniques sponge. And then I did the other half of my face using a brush. I used my Sonia G Jumbo Base brush, which is my favorite brush for foundation. So you can see me applying it here, and the main differences are, I think, kind of what you might expect. So with the sponge, I found I had to use quite a bit more product than I did with the brush because the sponge absorbs the product. That's just kind of the nature of the beast. So I used one full pump for half of my face with the sponge, and I found that gave me the kind of medium coverage that I wanted, that kind of middle of the road medium coverage, not too heavy, but enough coverage for what I like and what I want. And that for me is a little bit more than I would normally. Usually I use one pump of foundation for my whole face. I mean, obviously it depends on how much is coming out of one pump, but my standard for that kind of like thicker type of medium coverage formulation for foundation would be one pump, like with the Shiseido, both of the Shiseido Synchro Skin foundations that I have, I use one pump and that's perfect for my whole face. But if using the sponge with this Charlotte Tilbury, I think that it's best to probably, for me, use two pumps for my entire face and that'll be good. For the side with the brush, I ended up actually only using about half of the pump. So I pumped out a full pump on the back of my hand for that half of my face as well. I might not have even used half of the pump. So it took quite a lot less product. The brush doesn't absorb the product like a sponge does. And it took quite a lot less product with the brush. But I have to say I preferred the way that it looked and the feeling of how it applied, I think, as well, using the sponge. So it's going to be more economical to use a brush, definitely, but I preferred the way it really sunk into the skin, really became one with the skin and gave a really nice, very smooth finish while maintaining that kind of dewy, hydrated finish of the foundation. The brush still maintained that dewy, hydrated finish, but it really didn't sink into the skin as well. I found, especially kind of in the area around my nose, that's where I would have the most visible pores. It did kind of highlight those pores a little bit. But what I did after that, and I'm sorry I didn't film this part, but after I had applied that side with the brush, I just took the sponge and kind of patted over it, and that really helped the product to sink into the skin. So that might be a good compromise. If you still want to be using less of the product, you could apply it with a brush and then just use a damp sponge to just kind of pat it into the skin and kind of perfect the finish. In terms of the shade of this foundation, I have the shade 1 Neutral, which is the lightest shade in the range, and it is a bit darker than I was hoping for, but not darker than I expected. I think this is a common problem for me, at least with Charlotte Tilbury complexion products, and I know that it is for some other people with fair skin as well, is that her shades tend to run a little bit warm and usually don't go quite light enough for those of us who like a really light foundation shade. So it's not the worst. It is something that I can still wear in the winter time when my skin is at its palest, but it's just a touch warmer than I would like and a little touch deeper. I would like something just a little bit brighter and a little bit lighter for my skin, but I can make it work by pairing it with concealers and or powders that are a bit lighter to just kind of lift the complexion a little bit and make it still look quite quite natural. So you'll be able to see me applying my concealer and how that kind of affected it. I used the Fenty Bright Fix Eye Brightening Concealer, and again, I had the lightest shade of this one, Rose Quartz. And this is a really quite a nice light shade, as you can see in the footage. And this really helped to just brighten up those areas that I felt were not quite bright enough from the tone of the foundation. And I liked this concealer with it as well because I felt that it's the type of formula that isn't going to really change the finish of the foundation too much. I find this concealer to be, well, first of all, it's quite thin in comparison to a lot of other concealers, so I like that. It's not gonna really cake up at all. It's very thin, and it is also quite a kind of natural finish. Like it almost wants to just take on the finish of whatever other complexion products you're using, so it's not gonna add much dewiness and radiance. It's not gonna mattify. It's just going to meld in and mesh with the other complexion products that you're using. So I thought that would be a good choice for this, and the tone as well worked really nicely, as I said, to kind of brighten and lighten parts of the face up. Then I used the same kind of thinking when choosing my powder. So again, I used a Fenty product. I used the Fenty Matte Powder Foundation for my setting powder, and you can see I only applied it strategically, pretty much where I had applied the concealer, just to kind of set that down. And although it is a matte finish, again, it's quite a thin, kind of almost sheer powder foundation, so it doesn't add too much coverage, but just a little bit. And because I have it in the shade 100, which is a really very nice light shade, it works well, again, the same way the concealer did, just to lift everything and lighten and brighten where I needed that to happen. And although it is matte, it's not too mattifying. It doesn't alter the finish too much of everything else that you've got going on, but just does a nice job of setting things down. So that was my whole base routine that I used. And then I just did the rest of my makeup, and everything blended really nicely. Everything will be listed below. I used powder, bronzers, and I used a combination of cream and powder blushes and powder highlighter, and everything just blended really nicely together, and I didn't have any issues with that. So this is the kind of end result of the makeup. You can see now how the foundation looks with everything on top of it. And I have to say, I do like this foundation. Now, it's very rare, in fact, I don't know that it's ever happened for me, that I've fallen in love with a foundation within the first few times of using it. It always takes me a little bit of time to kind of get to know the foundation and come to really appreciate the different qualities of it. So I'm not like over the moon about this foundation. I'm not fully in love with it yet, but it is something that I'm going to continue to use, and I'm quite happy with how it is upon my first couple of impressions. So I really like the finish of it. I think it's a beautiful, very smoothing finish, but it still has that dewy, radiant feel to it, which I really appreciate. And having that paired with a really nice medium coverage. So it's not a full coverage foundation, definitely. It is, as it claims to be, a medium coverage, not light medium. I just think of it as just a medium coverage, which is really nice. For me, that covers enough, but not too much. And it allows for you to do any kind of makeup look. I find that medium coverage is my favorite because it tends to be a little bit adjustable, and you can get a really nice kind of very natural, almost no makeup-y type of look with a medium coverage foundation. But you can also do more kind of glam, more full-on looks. I find that if I'm doing like a strong eye look, I'd say this is kind of a fairly strong eye look, but not as strong as it could get. You kind of need to have enough going on with your coverage and your base to really make that all balance out. So I think it's a really nice versatile foundation. I've mentioned this in, I think, just my previous video, that it does have hyaluronic acid in it, which is a concern for me because hyaluronic acid can break me out. I'm not sure yet. I've only worn this one day. I wore it for 8 hours yesterday, and it wore really nicely. I didn't use concealer with it yesterday, but I did use that Fenty powder just to set in kind of the areas that I would add concealer, as well as around my nose, basically where I would tend to have my oils come through throughout the day. And I did notice that my oils came through around that area as the day went on yesterday, but not to the level that I felt I needed to touch up at all. So even after 8 hours of wearing the foundation. I didn't touch up with powder at all. I had only applied the powder right after I applied the foundation when I first put it on at the beginning of the day, and I didn't find that I needed any kind of touch up. So that's really nice, especially for, again, a medium coverage, one that's more hydrating with that kind of dewy finish. For me, I don't want it to be too dewy because I don't want to have to be, you know, touching it up throughout the day. I don't want to find it sliding off my face through the day. It wore really nicely. It did kind of fade down a little bit, but in a really nice, even way. Didn't have any issues with it collecting into certain areas or bunching up or creasing or anything like that. Those aren't generally issues that I have with foundation, but I also didn't have those issues with this one. So I think it's a very strong formula, and I think that if you can get a shade that works for you, this can be a really nice everyday type of foundation. It feels very comfortable on the skin, and as I said, I really like how it kind of both smooths and perfects the skin while also having that nice sort of skin-like moisturized dewy finish. So I just wanted to show some comparisons. I apologize for the background vacuum noise. I'm almost finished here, so hopefully it won't be too much of an issue. So this is the Charlotte Tilbury in the shade 1 Neutral. This is the Lisa Eldridge foundation in the shade 1. This is Lisa Eldridge in the shade 4. And then here we have the Lancome Tante Dull Concealer, again in the lightest shade 090. And then this one here is the Rose Ink Concealer in the shade LX010. So you can see it's interesting to kind of see all the different undertones going on here. If I were to try and find the one that I think is closest to the Charlotte Tilbury, probably the Lisa Eldridge shade 4. I think the Charlotte Tilbury is maybe a little bit lighter than that Lisa Eldridge one, but their undertones to me look quite similar. There's a little bit more of that kind of yellowy warmth in both of those shades. And then the Lisa Eldridge shade 1, part of the reason I like this so much is that it's really nice and light, but it also has kind of a brightness. It has a liveliness to it that a lot of light foundation shades don't have. So if you look, for example, at this, the Rose Ink one here, this is a very light shade, but it has a bit of a dull quality to it, a little bit of a grayness to it almost. I've mentioned this before. To me, that's not the worst thing. I actually don't mind that because I find that kind of duller quality can help to tone down some of the redness that might be in my skin. But something that kind of sets that Lisa Eldridge shade 1 apart, and actually the Fenty the Bright Fix Concealer, I think, is also similar in that way, is it has that kind of bright vibrancy while still being a really light shade. But I just wanted to show you all of these just so you can kind of get a sense. I've mentioned recently that the Lancome Tante Dull in 090 is a little bit too dark for me in this winter season when my skin is at its very lightest, and I would say that it's kind of a similar depth to the Charlotte Tilbury. So you can kind of see why I feel that the Charlotte Tilbury is just a little bit darker than I would like, but it is something that I said I can make it work by pairing it with other lighter products. I think that covers everything I wanted to mention, at least at this point, about the foundation. I do like the packaging. It's kind of like a squeeze tube, except that it actually has a pump in it. I feel that the top could be a little bit smoother to remove, but it could be that I just need to use it a little bit more so it kind of warms up and gets used to coming off and going back on, but it just does kind of stick a little bit trying to remove it, but that's not a big deal. I do like this format. I find it's nice and small. If you wanted to travel with it, I think it would be quite a good candidate for a travel foundation. It's lightweight, so it's not going to be too heavy in a bag. So please let me know your thoughts. What do you think of this foundation? Have you tried it, or are you interested in it? Let me know if you have any questions or comments. I always love to see those. And if you'd like to see more from me and you haven't subscribed to my channel already, I would really love for you to do so. Thank you so much for watching. Take care, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye.